Throughout this article, the unqualified term dollar and the dollar symbol refer to the Australian dollar unless as noted. The economy of Australia is one of the largest mixed-market economies in the world, with a GDP of $1.525 trillion as of 2014. Australia's total wealth is $6.4 trillion. In 2012, it was the 12th largest national economy by nominal GDP and the 17th largest measured by PPP-adjusted GDP, about 1.7% of the world economy. Australia is the 19th largest importer and 19th largest exporter. The Reserve Bank of Australia publishes forecasts of the economy quarterly. The Australian economy is dominated by its service sector, comprising 68% of GDP. The mining sector represents 7% of GDP, including services to mining. The total value of the mining industry in 2009-10 was 8.4% of GDP. Economic growth is largely dependent on the mining sector and agricultural sector, with the products to be exported mainly to the East Asian market. The Australian Securities Exchange in Sydney is the largest stock exchange in Australia and in the South Pacific, and ranks 9th in the world in terms of market capitalisation. Australia is home to some of the largest companies in the world, including but not limited to BHP Billiton, National Australia Bank, Commonwealth Bank, Rio Tinto Group, ANZ, Westpac, Telstra, Macquarie Bank, Woolworths and AMP, which also are the 10 largest companies in Australia. The Australian dollar is the currency of the Commonwealth of Australia and its territories, including Christmas Island, Cocos Islands, and Norfolk Island. It is also the official currency of the independent Pacific Island nations of Kiribati, Nauru and Tuvalu. Australia is a member of the APEC, G20, OECD and WTO. The country has also entered into free trade agreements with ASEAN, Canada, Chile, Korea, Malaysia, New Zealand, Japan, Singapore, Thailand and the United States. The ANZCERTA agreement with New Zealand has greatly increased integration with the economy of New Zealand, and in 2011 there was a plan to form an Australasian single economic market by 2015. History. 20th century Australia's average GDP growth rate for the period 1901 to 2000 was 3.4% annually. Growth peaked during the 1920s, followed by the 1950s and the 1980s. By contrast, the late 1910s, early 1920s, the 1930s, the 1970s and early 1990s were marked by financial crises. Economic liberalisation. From the early 1980s onwards, the Australian economy has undergone a continuing economic liberalisation. In 1983, under Prime Minister Bob Hawke, but mainly driven by Treasurer Paul Keating, the Australian dollar was floated and financial deregulation was undertaken. Early 1990s recession. The early 1990s recession came swiftly after the Black Monday of October 1987, resulting from a stock collapse of unprecedented size caused the Dow Jones Industrial Average to fall by 22.6%. This collapse, larger than the stock market crash of 1929, was handled effectively by the global economy, and the stock market began to quickly recover. However, in North America, the lumbering savings and loans industry was facing decline, which eventually led to a savings and loan crisis which compromised the well-being of millions of Americans. The following recession thus impacted the many countries closely linked to the United States, including Australia. Paul Keating, who was Prime Minister at the time, famously referred to it as the recession that Australia had to have. During the recession, GDP fell by 1.7%, employment by 3.4% and the unemployment rate rose to 10.8%. Despite this, there was a beneficial reduction in inflation. Mining boom. The establishment of a mining industry continued the high level of economic growth in the post-war period. The opportunities for large profits in pastoralism and mining attracted considerable amounts of British capital, while expansion generally was supported by enormous government outlays for transport, communication and urban infrastructures, which also depended heavily on British finance. As the economy expanded, large-scale immigration became necessary to satisfy the growing demand for workers, especially after the end of convict transportation to the eastern mainland in 1840. Australia's mining operations secured continued economic growth, and Western Australia itself has benefited strongly from mining iron ore and gold from the 1960s and 1970s, which fueled the rise of suburbanisation and consumerism in Perth, the capital and most populous city of Western Australia, as well as other regional centres. Australia's economy grew at an average annual rate of 3.6% for over 15 years, well above the OECD average of 2.5%. Global financial crisis. The Australian government stimulus package helped to prevent a recession. The World Bank expected Australia's GDP growth rate to be 3.2% in 2011 and 3.8% in 2012. The economy expanded by 0.4% in the fourth quarter of 2011, and expanded by 1.3% in the first quarter of 2012. The growth rate was reported to be 4.3% year-on-year. The International Monetary Fund in April 2012 predicted that Australia would be the best-performing major advanced economy in the world over the next 2 years. The Australian Government Department of the Treasury anticipated forecast growth of 3.0% in 2012 and 3.5% in 2013. The National Australia Bank in April 2012 cut its growth forecast for Australia to 2.9% from 3.2%. And JP Morgan in May 2012 cut its growth forecast to 2.7% in calendar 2012 from a previous forecast of 3.0%. Also its forecast for growth in 2013 to 3.0% from 3.3%. Deutsche Bank in August 2012, and Société Générale in October 2012 warned that there is risk of recession in Australia in 2013. There are differing opinions about whether there was recession in Australia during recent years. From 2012 to early 2013, Australia's national economy grew, but some non-mining states in Australia's non-mining economy experienced a recession. Overview. Australia's per capita GDP is higher than that of the UK, Germany, and France in terms of purchasing power parity. Per capita GDP. Australia is ranked 5th in the world. The country was ranked 2nd in the United Nations 2011 Human Development Index and 6th in the Economist Worldwide Quality of Life Index 2005. Australia's sovereign credit rating is AAA, higher than the United States of America. According to the 2011 Credit Suisse Global Wealth Report, Australia has a median wealth of $222,000. The highest in the world and nearly 4 times the amount of each U.S. adult. The proportion of those with wealth above $100,000 is the highest of any country, 8 times the world average. Average wealth was $397,000, the world's second highest after Switzerland. The 2014 issue of the Credit Suisse Global Wealth Report explains that this reflects a large endowment of land and natural resources relative to population, as well as being a result of high urban real estate prices. The emphasis on exporting commodities rather than manufactures has underpinned a significant increase in Australia's terms of trade during the rise in commodity prices since 2000. Australia's current account is about 2.6% of GDP negative. Australia has had persistently large current account deficits for more than 50 years. Inflation has typically been 2 to 3% and the base interest rate 5 to 6%. The service sector of the economy, including tourism, education and financial services, constitutes 69% of GDP. Australian National University in Canberra also provides a probabilistic interest rate setting project for the Australian economy, which is compiled by shadow board members from the ANU academic staff. Rich in natural resources, Australia is a major exporter of agricultural products, particularly wheat and wool, minerals such as iron ore and gold, and energy in the forms of liquefied natural gas and coal. Although agriculture and natural resources constitute only 3% and 5% of GDP, respectively, they contribute substantially to export performance. Australia's largest export markets are Japan, China, South Korea, India and the US. In the past decade, one of the most significant sectoral trends in the economy has been the growth of the mining sector. In terms of contribution to GDP, this sector grew from around 4.5% in 1993-94 to almost 8% in 2006-07. The services sector has grown considerably, with property and business services in particular growing from 10% to 14.5% of GDP over the same period, making it the largest single component of GDP. This growth has largely been at the expense of the manufacturing sector, which in 2006-07 accounted for around 12% of GDP. A decade earlier, it was the largest sector in the economy, accounting for just over 15% of GDP. Regional differences. Much of the economic growth in Australia is attributed to areas of the country where mining and resource-based industries and services are mostly located. Western Australia and the Northern Territory are the only states that have economic growth. During 2012 and 2013, Australian Capital Territory, Queensland, Tasmania, South Australia, New South Wales and Victoria have had recessions. The Australian economy is characterised as a two-speed economy. From June 2012 to March 2013, Victoria has had a recession. In 2012, the Government of Victoria cut 10% of all jobs in the public service. Taxation in Australia is levied at the federal, state, and local government levels. The federal government raises revenue from personal income taxes and business taxes. Other taxes include the goods and services tax, excise and customs duties. The federal government is the main source of income for state governments. As a result of state dependence on federal taxation revenue to meet decentralized expenditure responsibilities, Australia is said to have a vertical fiscal imbalance. Besides receipts of funds from the federal government, states and territories have their own taxes, in many cases at slightly different rates. State taxes commonly include payroll tax levied on businesses, a poker machine tax on businesses that offer gambling services, land tax on people and businesses that own land, and most significantly, stamp duty on sales of land and other items. The states effectively lost the ability to raise income tax during the Second World War. In 1942, Canberra invoked its constitutional taxation power, and enacted the Income Tax Act and 3 other statutes to levy a uniform income tax across the country. These acts sought to raise the funds necessary to meet burgeoning wartime expenses and reduce the unequal tax burden between the states by replacing state income taxes with a centralized tax system. The legislation could not expressly prohibit state income taxes, does not curtail the power of states to levy taxes, but the federal government's proposal made localized income tax extremely difficult politically. The federal government offered instead compensatory grants authorized by S. 96 of the Constitution for the Loss of State Income Act 1942. The states rejected Canberra's regime and challenged the legislation's validity in the first uniform tax case of 1942. The High Court of Australia held that each of the statutes establishing Commonwealth income tax was a valid use of the S. 51 Power, in which Latham C.J. noted that the system did not undermine essential state functions and imposed only economic and political pressure upon them. The second uniform tax case reaffirmed the court's earlier decision and confirmed the power of the federal government's power to make S. 96 grants conditionally. Since the second uniform tax case, a number of other political and legal decisions have centralized fiscal power with the Commonwealth. In Har vs. New South Wales, the High Court found that the Business Franchise Licenses Act 1987 was invalid because it levied a customs duty, a power exercisable only by the Commonwealth. This decision effectively invalidated state taxes on cigarettes, alcohol and petrol. Similarly, the imposition of a Commonwealth goods and services tax in 2000 transferred another revenue base to the Commonwealth. Consequently, Australia has one of the most pronounced vertical fiscal imbalances in the world. The states and territories collect just 18% of all governmental revenues but are responsible for almost 50% of the spending areas. Furthermore, the centralisation of revenue collection has allowed Canberra to force state policy in areas well beyond the scope of its constitutional powers, by using the grant's power to mandate the terms on which the states spend money in areas over which it has no power. Local governments have their own taxes to enable them to provide services such as local road repairs, local planning and building management, garbage collection, street cleaning, park maintenance services, libraries, and museums. Councils also rely on state and federal funding to provide infrastructure and services such as roads, bridges, sporting facilities and buildings, aged care, maternal and child health, and childcare. In 2000, a goods and services tax was introduced similar to the European-style VAT. Employment. According to the Australian Bureau of Statistics, the unemployment rate in September 2013 was 5.8%. The youth unemployment rate was 11.6% and the teenage unemployment rate was 27.6%. According to Roy Morgan Research, the unemployment rate in February 2015 is 11%. Australians who were either unemployed or underemployed was estimated to be 20.6% in 2015. 4 million were estimated to be in part-time or casual employment, about 40% of the Australian workforce. However, 99% of refugees has a job. Data released in mid-November 2013 showed that the number of welfare recipients had grown by 55%. In 2007, 228,621 News-taught unemployment allowance recipients were registered, a total that increased to 646,414 in March 2013. The accuracy of official unemployment figures has been brought into question in the Australian media due to discrepancies between the methods of different research bodies, differing definitions of the term unemployed, and the ABS practice of counting underemployed people as employed. As of February 2015, the strongest industries in Australia by total number of employees were healthcare and social assistance. 1,460,281 employees. Retail trade. 1,232,590 employees. Construction. 1,021,686 employees. Professional, scientific and technical services. 987,846 employees. Manufacturing. 922,447 employees. Employment for newly qualified professionals according to the Graduate Careers Survey. Full-time employment for newly qualified professionals from various occupations has declined since 2011. Some examples are In the Graduate Careers Survey 2014 it is explained that, however, GCA's Beyond Graduation survey indicates that the middle and longer-term outlook is very positive, with the employment figures for 2010 graduates growing by 14 percentage points 3 years later. The Beyond Graduation Survey 2013 included 12,384 responses and the Graduate Careers Survey 2014 included 113,263 responses. The professional associations of some of these occupations have expressed their criticism of the immigration policy.